So with that, members, I'm going to ask Chief McCarthy and Mr. Missel to come forward. And I'm guessing the chief is going first as the board chair, but it's just a guess.
It is just a guess. Thank you, Chair, members of the committee. I am just here to say hello, and my participation will be mostly if there are any questions. But Executive Director Misselt is here, and he will take you through the overview.
Very well. Welcome, Chief, and welcome to you, Executive Director Misselt.
Thank you, Chair Mariani, and thank you to all the members, the new members, as well as the existing members from last session. I look forward to working with all of you, and I will keep this as brief as I possibly can. Just a brief overview and then a little bit of an update. So for those who don't know, the Post Board is a licensing and regulatory agency. We oversee peace officers in the state of Minnesota. We are Minnesota is a little bit unique in being the licensing state. Many states are certification states. We're not the only one, but we've been at it for a long time. It was created by legislation in 1977. Our main enabling statutes are 626.84. That's the enabling legislation, and covers the makeup of the board, what we do, what our mission is. And then equally as important is our governing rules. Chapter 67 administrative rules, and I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing with those going forward. Of course, they act as really the same force of legislation in a lot of ways in how we do our business every day. Our role, as I mentioned, is a licensing and regulatory agency. We are part of the executive branch, an independent regulatory board. Members are appointed by the governor. We currently have 17 members. It was 15, and then with the reform legislation passed during the special session, that went to 17. I'll talk about the composition of that a little bit. The main areas that we oversee are your pre-service education, meaning the folks that come right out of college or whatnot that want to be a police officer. They have to have post-secondary education, and in the case of the state of Minnesota, a minimum of a 2-year college degree. Then they would go through what is currently called skills or the professional peace officer education program to basically teach the nuts and bolts of being an officer. The other big piece we do is testing. We have an online test. It's computer-based, has been computer-based since I think we went live in 2018. And it works very well. It allows candidates who would like to become police officers in the state of Minnesota to test really all over the country, even worldwide. I believe last year, a year before, we had an individual who had applied for reciprocity and tested overseas in Iraq or somewhere in the Middle East, was able to take the exam there. So kind of on the forefront of that. Licensing is the other big issue. Once the education's done, they've passed the exam, and the department hires a candidate, then they become officially licensed. Prior to that, they're only license eligible. You do not get your license issued to you until you're actually hired by a police department or a sheriff's department or the state agency. Once you're licensed and the officer's out there working, there's a requirement of continuing education, like most professions. Same with nursing or law, lawyers or et cetera. That requirement is 48 hours over a 3-year licensing cycle. So that licensing cycle runs for 3 years. So roughly every year when we go through renewal, the Post Board is processing anywhere from 3,300 to 4,000 renewals annually. To get to the total of 11 to 12,000 peace officers we have in the state. Now that includes active and inactive. And then the final big piece, and this was a piece of a part of our role that has obviously been looked at or received a lot of scrutiny last year or so, is violations of standards of conduct and violations of their licensure. And what is the Post Board's role in that regard? how far do we go, and that is all being looked at and examined, and quite honestly, just overall across all these business processes, we are in a stage of updating, review, you name it, shifting our paradigms. And again, I may speak to that a little bit earlier. There may be or a little bit later. There should be questions. I'm guessing to that effect. So, what are our stakeholders? The Post Board answers to a myriad of stakeholders across the state. Peace officers, citizens. We receive complaints directly from citizens, from cities. We take complaints from anyone and everybody that chooses to file a complaint or has a question. We also work closely or are involved in a stakeholder relationship with the MPPOA, the Minnesota Chiefs, the sheriffs, associations, certainly the courts at times, especially the Office of Administrative Hearings, for rulemaking and also disciplinary processes, other state agencies, the League of Minnesota Cities, right up to the governor's office, of course, the legislature, as well as the media. During the let's just say which was 2020. I spent more time talking to the media during that time than I did the first 2 years. I was here at the Post Board, so obviously a strong stakeholder group. So some of our key strategies at the board, some of the basic functions, our business that we engage in is, of course, creating and administering the licensing exams online. Those are reviewed annually. We have a contract with the PSI, which is the company that develops the exam, brings in subject matter experts, updates it, and so on. And it's administered through Pearson VUE, which is a company that provides the online portion of the testing. We monitor agency compliance with mandated policies and procedures. We like it. It is annual in the sense that they have to respond to us every year. In fact, we're just starting that now to basically provide testimony, if you will. I'm trying to think of the correct word, but that provide proof that they've adopted all the mandatory policies, and then they submit allegations of misconduct to us as well. We were doing site visits annually to departments. That has been thrown to the wind, obviously, with COVID. We've gone to more calling and touching base and emailing with agencies. We are in the process of reviewing that whole business process as well to see how we'll do that in the future. I would like to see if we're able to get our database up and running and doing the things that we believe it will do, that we'll be able to do a lot of this through online or electronic means versus sending people out. That being said, I won't get down in the weeds at this point, but there is importance to having face-to-face relationship as well. So we're balancing those needs right now. We monitor compliance with standards of conduct. Licensees have to report it to us. We learn of potential violations of standard conduct in a myriad of ways, sometimes from the chief law enforcement officer, the CLEO, as we call them. The licensee themselves is required to report. Will sometimes, and it's not perfect by any stretch, we'll just see the article in the paper, just like you all do, and we pinpoint that this is one we got to watch and keep an eye on, decide if we're going to work on it right now, if we're just going to kind of watch it as it proceeds through the criminal justice system, if in fact it involves criminal charges. And then one of the other big jobs that we do, or part of our roles, managing the training reimbursement fund. The legislature provides for training for agencies and for officers across the state. It's a sizable amount. We monitor and manage that, make sure that all the officers renewing in that particular year have their 48 credits before they can renew. And part of that is the submission. They have to submit for training reimbursement for the costs of doing that training, that continuing education. And then we distribute those funds accordingly. Quick summary of agency statistics, easy for me to say. I just did this yesterday, actually. So as of right now, January 2021, we have 413 law enforcement agencies. As you can see on the sheet, 303 municipal PDs, 87 sheriff's offices. That hasn't changed and doesn't change typically, obviously. And then we have tribal PDs, the non-municipal specialty PDs. That would be your Metro Transit, Airports Commission, and so on. And then, of course, the state agencies such as the BCA and the State Patrol. The one thing I will say about this statistic, which I don't think is well known and is interesting to me, is that when I started here in 2017, October 2017, I believe we were at 432 law enforcement agencies across the state. We are now 3 years, roughly 3 years later, down at 413. Trend I have noticed, against anecdotal, I can't give you statistical significance or multiple regression analysis of it, and there's not enough numbers to do that anyway. But it is interesting to see there are a lot of smaller agencies that are dropping off the radar screen. I think that is primarily due to, obviously, budget considerations and so on. And that's at the municipal level. So. Post-staffing. So post-staffing, we're currently 12 full-time employees, although we only have 10 in the office. We have a couple of vacancies we're still trying to fill. And then there were 2 more positions that were added during the special session, the 2020 legislature, that were added to address some of the requirements in the police reform bill. And I guess I would just say commentary on that, just to say to Chair Mariani and this group, particularly the members at the time, that was very critical and much appreciated. Many times, I shouldn't say many times, but there are times when agencies are asked to do certain things, but then not provided the resources. And I know I'm very appreciative that we were provided those resources so that we can get this done. Post-board members, appointed by the governor to 4-year staggered terms. I will not read to you all of the list there. I think many of you are probably aware of it anyway. The change that I'd mentioned earlier from 15 to 17 comes from the addition of 2 public members. And I believe that was an effort on part of the Chair Mariani in this committee in the reform legislation. Those positions are yet to be appointed. We're waiting for appointment of several positions from the governor's office. So right now we're a little bit short on the board end, but we have our quorum. We're able to get business done. So I'll just close very quickly by just covering an overview of a couple board initiatives that we are undertaking right now. Early in 2020, shortly after I took over as the interim, we had decided we were going to look at a comprehensive overview of our rules, long overdue, and under Chapter 67. So there are plenty of rules in there that are either outdated, obsolete, although in a nod to the previous administration, we did clean out a lot of those with a more shortened rule-making effort that got rid of some of the obsolete rules, but there's still a lot of things that needed to be updated. And then also in light of the reform legislation and what we all view, and I think the chair and I are and the board are all in unison on this, the changing expectations for the post board. There are things in rule that have to be changed to accommodate that, and the change environment and where we want to go with this agency. So we did an audit of the post-business processes. It's across the board, all the things I mentioned, the pre-service, continuing education, testing, so on and so forth, done by the International Association of Directors of Law Enforcement Standards and Training, or IADLIS. That goes completed on time in September, October of 2020. And then we're working on reviewing the recommendations and next steps for that. In fact, one of them I'll talk about shortly. And then, of course, the reform legislation that was passed, the big changes that were made or requirements, I would say, for us to meet for the board was the building of a complaint database and officer profile that would allow agencies to report in real-time complaint data. and then also a training database. We need to be able to identify the trainers and develop a list of approved trainers that then agencies can send their officers to for particularly the mandated training. It dovetails well in that something that I've thought about for some time is that we need to build a little bit more robust training cadre anyway. So this is going to, I think, work well together. With regard to the database and that computer work, we have signed a contract with a company. They're called Benchmark Analytics out of Chicago, Illinois. They've been around for a little over 10 years. They started out with a partnership with the University of Chicago, doing an early warning system for the City of Chicago Police Department, and they've expanded since then and now are developing statewide systems. So it was really a perfect fit for what we needed. They just went live beginning of the year with Colorado for a training database, and they're doing the use of force reporting for the state of New Jersey. So as one with experience working with new software systems or newer companies, it is encouraging that they've already built something out there, and hopefully someone else is the guinea pig and we get the good stuff when all the bugs are worked out. But we're well into it, and I will keep you updated on that count. We're working on hiring staff positions. We're finally getting there. We got some posted. We have a number of positions to fill: the assistant executive director, to continuing ed positions. Those are the folks that deal with continuing education, and a standards coordinator. And that person, that position, came out of the reform legislation to primarily work on the database. And what do we do with that complaint data when it comes in? How do we track it, and so on and so forth? The part I referred to regarding the rules is the job task analysis of the police officer position. That is best practices say to do that every 5 years. So we are on year 5. 2020 was the 5th year since it was last done, and it was last done in-house. What I'm trying to do right now is I've reached out to several academic institutions and also some of our other partners in, I'll just say, in the municipal community, to find someone who does this for a living. This is their job. They do a job task analysis. And what that is basically, we're going to look at the entire position. What does it require to be a police officer in the state of Minnesota, or generally as a police officer? And then that will then inform the data, the basis of data for us to make decisions about what should pre-service look like. What we're teaching in pre-service still what we should be teaching? Does it still apply? Does it apply to the job of police officer today in 2021, or is it a vestige of something from 1970? So in order to do that, you need a good job task analysis to assess what we should be doing going forward. Then finally, I'll just close out by saying there'll be a lot of additional involved discussions, and there's a lot of complexity here. We're doing our best to work our way through it because there's a lot of meshing. It's a system, and I say that to anybody who will listen. Rules are connected to statute, are connected to complaints, are connected to, it's all together. And if we're going to make changes in, for instance, the pre-service, that should reflect also what we're doing in continuing education, and then mesh with either rules or statutes. I know Chair Mariani and others in the legislature, also in the Senate, have asked, what would you like? Or you have any ideas for legislation for us? And the short answer is I can't give them a good answer. I'm not ready to come to the chair with major suggestions yet, because we're still figuring this out. We will need it. There are definitely changes that will need to be done to legislation or rules. But it's best to have a good idea and have the data gathered, as the chair hits home every time. Good data makes good decisions. So we're working on that, and that's it. With that, that's my summary, if you will, Chair, and I stand ready for any additional questions.
Terrific. Thank you, Director Misselt and Chief and Chair McCarthy. I have to say I'm encouraged by the approach and the tone of the post under both of your respective leadership. And I actually like that picture you painted, Director Misselt, with the convergence of rules, statute, and you called complaints. I like to think of it because that is sort of the mechanics of it. Dealing with a concern, a complaint. I like to think of it as the expectations of both professionals in this field and citizens. And so, the coming together of that is all about very good government. And so I really appreciate that. We're going to do a deeper dive in subsequent hearing on some of the reform, or much of the reform efforts underway. I will just very quickly flag that there are some data collection issues that I want to be able to bring forward in regards to that early warning system that I want the committee to have strong conversations around to make sure that we have the best data under which that we can make good decisions. But I won't use up other members' times for question and just jump into a few members. Representative O'Neill, I'll start with you. We'll then go to Representative Frazier, Representative Huot, and Representative Novotny. Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had to jump off quick to talk to somebody, a constituent. But I was wondering, since we still have the BCA here, if I could ask a quick question about the DNA lab and the database for victims of sexual assault for their rape kits. Did he give an update at all about that? And wondering if he didn't already, quickly do an update on that. I know lots of people in the public are asking me about that. So.
Representative O'Neill, if we have time after this, I will certainly, if they're still here, I'll pull you back up to have that question. If we can't get it in this time, they will be back. We will go into deeper dives, but I do appreciate the question. Representative Frazier.
Thank you, Chair Mariani. So in recent days, our country has gone through a lot. We've seen what's happened at the Capitol in DC. We've seen the threats that are potential threats to our own Capitol here and our elected officials here. There was just an article today that says that dozens of folks that attended the Capitol riots and conducted some of the violence there were listed as terrorists on the FBI's list. And it went on to note that the majority of those folks were considered to be affiliated with white supremacist groups. So I put that context because one of my questions that I have, and Chief McCarthy, it may be something that you can address. Have we ever had, and let me add this piece too. I will say that I've been working for a few years now, meeting on a consistent basis with some police chiefs and officers in the Northwest suburbs. And these are folks that are absolutely committed to public service, committed to the work that they do, passionate about serving the public and protecting the public, but they absolutely want to see anything that is going to be harmful to the profession and therefore harmful to the narrative about the work that they do rooted out of their departments in their profession. So I'll say that because I know those folks exist. I work closely with them and I want to advocate and push for the things that they want to see get done. It's going to make things better for our community. So my question is, in light of the information that we're getting from the investigations that are happening after the Capitol riots and the violence and the deaths that occurred there because of that, and also in light of this, there was a report, an intelligence report from 2006 that was declassified and unredacted that also talked about the concern that our intelligence communities have nationally in regards to white supremacist groups infiltrating our law enforcement departments. And the fact that we could have law enforcement officers that are sympathetic to their causes, lending their services and their access to these groups. Have we ever had any such complaints investigated at the post board, to your knowledge? To your knowledge, have we ever had that? I'd like to know. And the reason is because I'm looking to possibly bring legislation to address these concerns.
Chief McCarthy.
Thank you, Chair Mariani. Representative Fraser, to my knowledge, we have not received complaints, nor have we revoked the license of any peace officer in Minnesota for being a member of a group that is deemed a white supremacist group. Any problem that exists in society exists within the police officer ranks because we are members of society. So if domestic abuse is a problem in society, it's a problem within the police ranks. White supremacy is a problem in our community. White supremacy is a problem within our police ranks. The issue with the post board is our ability to, as you said, you were thinking about legislation, because we primarily deal with convictions. And because being a member of a hate group or a white supremacist group is not a violation of the law, that wouldn't really come to us. And usually agency by agency will have policies regarding what types of groups their members could be part of.
Very well. Representative Fraser?
Yes, Chief McCarthy, thank you for sharing that. And that's exactly what
Representative Fraser, if I could just for a second, there's some background noise. If you all can mute when you're not speaking, that would greatly help with cutting down on interrupting the discussion here. Representative Fraser.
Yeah. Chief McCarthy, thank you for sharing that. And that's exactly what I want to address. You may know my background is I'm a labor attorney, and mainly I work in the education arena. And the licensing boards that I operate or navigate in those instances, they have the ability based on the code of conduct to deal with things like that. And I want to make sure that we have that the post board has the ability to address those issues if need be. So thank you for sharing that information.
Thank you, Representative Fraser. Representative Huot.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, testifiers. To the chief or to the director, just real curious. I have many friends that are in law enforcement, even in EMS. I did that through the years, and I know the big day of post board to move on to that next step is so important. And like EMS, this was also developed in the 70s, and I always like to take a fresh look at things. Is Minnesota one of the only states that uses the post board model, or just briefly, or if you need to do it offline, could I get more information on what other states do to bring in their credentialing, or is it done by individual departments? I know we have a high requirement, but I just kind of want to know what other people are doing.
Yeah, good question. Thank you. Chief McCarthy or Director Missel?
Yeah, I can take that one. Thank you. The short answer is yes, other states do something similar. There are multiple post boards. There's quite a wide variety, as you would imagine, across 50 states and how they handle it. I mentioned that Minnesota's a licensing state. Not all states are licensing states. In fact, the state I did most of my career in, it was a certification state, so they had a little bit less leeway actually in dealing with conduct than Minnesota does. So you'll see a wide variety. One thing I would suggest is that the audit that we had done does lay out some of the states we were compared to and talks about some of the comparisons in terms of how they do business. But I can certainly, I have your email. I could send you some additional information, some links to what they do. And I'd be more than happy anytime you wanted to just have a conversation if you'd like me to, kind of flesh it out a little bit. But there is some sort of regulatory agency in almost every state with regard to law enforcement. Some are stronger than others. Some go farther than others.
Yeah, Director Missel and I look forward to a conversation about that audit and to further put ourselves in context with other states in terms of both their governance, but also their practices and rules. So thank you for that question, Representative Huot. I did have Representative Novotny on the list, but maybe I was mistaken. But I want to make sure, since I named it, whether I should be calling on you, Representative Novotny.
Thank you, Chair Mariani. Actually, I did have a separate question, and I was going to take that offline.
Okay.
But for Director Mislet, with the extensive backgrounds checks that are done and the psychological examinations, would it be fair to say that any member of any hate group would possibly be identified for selection or elimination from the selection process as a peace officer? Aren't there steps already in place to weed out any person that has hate in their minds?
And just to be clear, Representative Odney, this was an inquiry from Representative Frazier, who's contemplating legislation, but Director Missel, anything in terms of current practice relative to that question? Director Missel?
I'll step in for him here, Chair, if that would be okay.
Sure, Chief McCarthy.
Yes, Representative Novotny, we do extensive background checks to officers prior to them coming into the skills program, as well as prior to them coming into the police profession in each individual agency. I would, as smart as we like to think we are, I don't know that I could ever tell you who has hate in their mind. I can tell you if they associate with groups that are listed as hate groups, or if they have tattoos that would be representative of membership in a group that our agency would not want to be associated with. So any extremist groups that part of membership is in contradiction with our state constitution, and then our department values could be weeded out at that time. Once that's going forward, we don't really have those mechanisms in place right now.
Very well, thank you. Thank you, Representative Novotny, for your question. Representative Long.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've heard in the past some concerns about content evaluation for trainings, and I was curious what changes have been made recently in how we evaluate what types of trainings are certified.
Director Missel.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Mariani and Representative Long. And I apologize for that earlier. All of a sudden my connection was terrible and I couldn't hear a word. So with regard to the training, right now I hesitate to say status quo because we have made changes in terms of how much detail we go into. And of course, we are now considering with the legislation that warrior training as an example, we're evaluating it for that. Right as of this moment, we're reconfiguring how we look at training and trying to determine how we narrow down and assess training, and rather than being approving any and all training that's law enforcement related that comes through, narrowing it down to the most important kind of training, mandated training, and so on. One of the things that we're looking for out of the software program that is both going to be database for complaints and other notification of investigations is the training piece, and included in there is an evaluation functionality. That's something we don't get now. So where courses will be can be evaluated, we can make them mandatory to be evaluated and submitted, and then get our head around what that data is telling us as those evaluations and those reviews come in. I would just say globally that because of a lot of things we've talked about in the past, my focus, and I think the board's focus is going to be, we want to concentrate in on those high risk, high liability, important training pieces, the mandated training. And I think I mentioned this before, maybe even to this committee, where at least for me, I'd like to see us push aside the stuff that really, it's nice, and if Chief McCarthy as an example decides she wants to send her officer to an Excel training course, great. I don't know that requires a post-board oversight to review that course, whereas a use of force or firearms training, we would want to. So I would just say we're aware of it and we're reconfiguring as we speak, like a lot of things. So I hope that helps.
All right. Thank you, Director Bissell.